We're here at Netroots Nation 13 in San Jose, and it's my opportunity or my pleasure to interview one of the recipients of the Community Quilt. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your quilt?
Hi, my name on Daily Kos is Shanikka. I am a front pager at Kos. My real name is Renee, and I have the unique privilege of being the recipient of the 100th quilt that has been made by the Community Quilt Project. In terms of myself, there's not a whole lot to tell. Most people read my writing and they either love me or hate me. I love everybody, so that works out well. In terms of my day job, as most people know, I'm an attorney at a commercial law firm, but I am blessed to be able to dedicate 100% of my time to the provision of pro bono service to people in need, whether it is whether it is direct individuals or nonprofit organizations serving those in need.
Can you tell us about your quilt?
Oh, my quilt. My quilt is the most wonderful gift I have ever received, other than one I got from my husband when we first got married, because he gave me a star. And for those women out there, you know that that's pretty high up there. So the quilt is just a little bit below that. When I got ill, I've had diverticular disease since last year. And when I had my second attack in March of this year, and ended up hospitalized, and then beginning what ended up being a huge round of complication after complication after complication that delayed the surgery that I needed to have, and then subsequently having surgery. I really wanted a quilt because I believe that feeling people's arms around you, virtually, physically, or otherwise, and feeling their energy, which I had already had so much of from those people in the Daily Kos community who knew how ill I was. I just felt like the quilt would just encapsulate that. But I was like, well, I feel tacky asking for a quilt. Because the quilt, I knew that Sara and her sister had begun this as an act of love and outreach. And I'm not somebody who says, well, could I have one? But I did let it slip that I really wished I had one. On a day at Black Kos. And Sara saw it and said, we would love to. So then they go off and they post, and these two diaries about it, asking for messages. I was in the hospital for both of those diaries, literally. And it was only Navajo, Nita, who let me know that they were up. And I remember that one of them went up the day before I had my surgery. And I logged in that night, and frankly, I was quite frightened because, I was quite ill. We'd already had so many issues and problems that had made me so sick. And we didn't know whether I was going to have a laparoscopic surgery, which was comparatively minor compared to what often happens, which is that they literally have to open you up aft to stern practically, and would have put me out of commission for 6 months. And I remember going in this diary, saying, leave these messages and reading. And I cannot describe the amount of strength that I got from it. These are people who I have met maybe 10% of them. Maybe, who nonetheless, just through these little pixels that I periodically post up that people either love or hate, had come to care enough about my well-being that they wanted to write something on my quilt. And I have never had an experience like that. And I'm 51 years old, so I've had plenty of time if that was the kind of experience I was going to have. So then, they get the messages, and then Denise Oliver Velez reaches out to Sara and says, I have some fabric, this particular piece of African fabric that I would like to be the center of this quilt. And this is secondhand from Sara. And I was like, oh my God, because of course, as people tell me, they look up to the things that I say sometimes and think, my heroine is Denise Oliver Velez. In terms of black women writing at Daily Kos and in the blogosphere. Truthfully, we could use 1,000 more like her instead of some of the posers that managed to get a lot of airplay. But then something else special happened. My daughter is a documentary filmmaker who lives in Rome. And she couldn't come to be with me while I was in the hospital. And I told her about this quilt that people were going to make for me. And she went to the diary. She's not a Cossack. And she went and she read and she calls me. She goes, "Mommy, you remember those fabrics that I brought you back from Ghana and Burkina Faso and all of these places where she's been over the years to film? She always brings me back African fabric." She's like, "Do you think that maybe somebody could put a piece of my fabric in the quilt?" Now, by this time, Sara and Ann had already started working on this quilt, I assumed, and I reached out. I was like, "Well, I'll check. It's probably too late." And I wrote them and said, it's probably a huge imposition, and it's probably going to throw all your design off. But my daughter has sent me all these fabrics, and she would like them to be part of it because that way she can feel like she's hugging me from so far away. And needless to say, they're like, "Of course we want to put the fabric in." So I send them everything I have, some of which they didn't use because it wasn't the right type of fabric for quilting. But then I get an email from Sara saying, "Oh, by the way, Ojibwa is coming by to bless some quilts. Do you object to him blessing yours?" And I literally broke out in tears over that because I personally am a very spiritual person, a religious person. And the notion that someone would take this earth-based fundamental power and lay it on my quilt in an effort to try to help me heal this process of healing, which is a process and it's going to be a long one, was just overwhelming for me. So then finally the day comes, beginning of the month. Actually, it was the 30th of May. Sara's like, "Your quilt's in the mail." I don't even want to say how happy I was. And we're like, "It'll be there in 2 days. 2 days come and go, no quilt. 3 days, no quilt." The 4th day, I go running out when the neighborhood mailman comes by and says, "Excuse me, but I'm supposed to have a package. And it's really important that I get this package." He's like, "Well, we haven't had any packages all week for this block." So then, of course, I start freaking out. I'm like, "Oh my God, the quilt is lost." And ultimately, between tracking numbers and everything, we find it, but I end up getting it about a week after I should have gotten it. And so the reason I mention it is because that whole week I was frantic. I was frantic. It's like, please don't, God, don't let this quilt, this thing that reflects all these beautiful things that people said to me, which me as a person who's deeply insecure, needed to be able to say, you can let go. We will catch you. One of the messages that a blogger named Coco Love posted was, we are lifting you up as God made you. And the tradition of lifting up in the African American church is one of the most powerful ideas. So I was like, if this quilt is gone, I don't know what I'm going to do. It finally shows up, and I open this box. And I'd already seen the picture, mind you, so it's not like I was surprised about the design of this. But I was blown away by two things. First of all, it was huge. I was like, wow, I had never counted how many people had messages. And then suddenly I see them visually, their heart space in blocks. And I sit there and I wrap myself up in this thing. And I'm, at this point, 50 pounds lighter than when all this started for me. So I had to wrap a little tighter than I would have, and that felt so good. And I sat up there on the back porch for about an hour, wrapped in this quilt. And then I took the pootie pad that they graciously made for my little beautiful epileptic crazy cat, Kaya. And put her on it. Now I have to say, Kaya has never been this calm. And she actually hasn't had a seizure all month, which for her is a big deal. And I'm convinced it is the energy and the catnip. that's in this booty pad. And we sit together with it. I sit on the couch with it when I get tired. And I slept under it one night. And every day, I pick up that quilt when I feel tired or when some of the complications that I had after surgery, that were lingering, kicked in, like this leg, where it's like it really doesn't matter what you do, it's gonna hurt. And I don't know that there's anything so emotionally debilitating, particularly to someone like me who's used to being in charge, being in control, being able to solve problems when there's a problem that you really can't make go away. To be able to say, I'm not by myself. I mean, I didn't feel 100% by myself. I have the most loving husband on the planet. But it's still I literally feel like all those people, I don't have to write them. I don't have to call them. All I got to do is wrap myself in them. And it's extraordinary for me. I was a long-winded answer to a straightforward question, but I can't go on and on. I could go on forever about what that quote means to me. I could.
Is there anyone that you'd like to thank?
Oh, Jesus. The fact that people took time to give money, including people who gave money for other people. The people that took time to think about prayers for me, the people who took the time to send healing energy to me, whether or not they are praying people, the people who took the time to say, I've been there and this is gonna be okay, and the people who sat and said, okay, who is Shanikka? Who is Renee? And wrote messages that were almost as if I had commissioned them to write them because they spoke to exactly who I was. I can't thank you enough. I can't hug people enough. I gladly owe everybody hugs and kisses, and if there's anything I can do for you, that's how much it means to me.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this with us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.